People don't break from stress, they break from being forced to stay in one position for too long. What if what we call resilience is actually a subtle form of paralysis? What if suffering is not a sign of strength but evidence of a disconnection from one's own body, emotions, and values in a society that worships steely wills, admires winners, and easily reduces any expression of weakness to sentimentality? Hinze's book takes a contrasting direction. It doesn't teach you to be indomitable, but it helps you look straight at fatigue, pain, and fear as legitimate citizens of life experience. This book is not for people looking for a motivational slogan. It's for people who have broken down while trying to be strong. For those who have wondered why the harder they try, the easier it is to fall, and especially for those who are brave enough to ask a question that seems too late. Is there another way to live powerfully without losing integrity to yourself? If you read carrying that same question around, maybe it's time to listen to a different kind of toughness. A courage that comes from understanding, not from suppression. Let's get started. As always, we encourage listeners to buy and read the book to fully appreciate its content. Now let me start summarizing this book. Pillar 1, Give up the mask. In reality, when talking about toughness, many people imagine a stern face, a strong body, a sinewy, taciturn man, ready to rush into danger without hesitation. They picture a soccer player straining to get his shoulder back together and then rushing back onto the field to continue playing. Or a cold soldier endures pain without complaint. We have been taught that being tough means not showing emotions. Not allowed to be weak, must endure, must suppress fear. And so, the whole society has built a monument to a type of person who seems ideal, but is actually a failed model. I was a part of that world. I grew up in a highly competitive sports environment. I used to believe that if I couldn't keep going when I was exhausted, then I wasn't strong enough. I have coached athletes who believed they had to ignore every warning signal from their body until they were so injured they couldn't run again. I have met parents who encouraged their children to endure pain in order to grow. Leaders think that repression and fear will build strong teams. We got it wrong. Very wrong. True strength does not come from pretending it doesn't hurt. It comes from listening to your body. Know yourself well and be brave enough to choose the right reaction in the wrong situation. Think of young Jordan McNabb, a University of Mary football player, who collapsed from exhaustion during a hot practice session. Instead of being supported, he was yelled at to get up and keep running. An hour and a half later, he was taken to the hospital. Too late. Jordan died of heatstroke, and that death was rationalized by a twisted, will-strengthening ideal. Many people say to be stronger. But they don't understand that sometimes the strongest thing is to stop, to recognize the limit, to listen to the little voice inside and sometimes dare to say I need help. I did not write this book to criticize those who believed in the old Togs style. I write because I have been there, believed, and taught others to believe. But I've seen it fall apart time and time again. In this first part, I want to take you on a journey to change your definition of toughness. It's not about putting on a poker face or ignoring the pain. It is about taking off the masks that society has put on us and facing the reality about ourselves, the world and our real challenges. Let's start with a familiar example. A group of elementary school students are running the U.S. President's fitness test. When the starting whistle blew, the children charged forward as if it were a 100-meter race. But after just one lap, the truth hit me in the face, the road was long, my energy was exhausted, and my speed was decreasing. Panting replaced footsteps. Many children switched from running to walking. Some children tried to keep running because their friends were cheering them on, but most of them were in a state of wavering between trying and giving up. I have watched thousands of professional races. But that run taught me an even more important lesson. We misjudge reality. And that brings us down from sports to life, from work to family. We are constantly stuck in the gap between reality and expectations. When we believe something will be easy but it turns out to be more difficult, our mind wanders, we panic, we say we can't do it and then we give up. There is a simple yet profound formula. Performance is the actual difficulty divided by the expected difficulty. If we think a challenge is normal but it is too harsh, we will be pushed into a defensive state. There was a spike in Tissot, anxiety flooded in, the body froze. We choose the easiest path, back down. But if we know in advance that it will be difficult and accept that, we can prepare better. True toughness comes from the ability to look reality in the eye. This is what I can do. That is what the challenge requires. I will act on those two things. Let me tell you about a soldier who is not a movie hero but a real man who experienced the battlefields of Afghanistan when I interviewed him. The first thing that caught my attention wasn't his good snake voice, but the way he talked about fear. People think special forces are fearless, he laughed. But the truth is I was scared every time the helicopter took off and I learned not to ignore that fear but to listen to it as an alarm bell, to be more alert, to observe more carefully, to act more decisively. This is the first step in the journey to rebuild the concept of toughness. Don't pretend you're not scared. Learn to live with fear. It sounds simple, but our entire culture teaches us to do the opposite. Slogans like Nopen, Norgen, or Manup have turned into moral standards. Emotions are seen as weakness, hesitation is seen as failure, and those who know pain and fear are eliminated from the race. Evidence of this is everywhere, from the football field, to the bedroom, to the family dinner table. Children are taught that crying is shameful. Men are taught that it is unmanly to confess. Women are required to be as strong as men if they want to be respected in the workplace. All of these things weigh heavily on everyone's shoulders. We start wearing masks. I once coached a very promising middle-distance runner. This girl has natural ability, speed, endurance, are all perfect, but every time it comes to a big tournament she is in turmoil. She didn't understand why, but her body seemed to refuse to cooperate. By the time I realized this, she had learned to hide her anxiety to the point where she couldn't even feel it herself. The body must scream in its own language. Heart pounding, legs shaking, throat tight. To get noticed, what she needed was not more practice but relearning how to deal with her emotions. Similarly, in military research, it has been found that it is those who acknowledge their insecurities and seek to adjust who recover best from trauma. Soldiers who ignore their fears and suppress painful memories are more likely to fall into depression and mental disorders. So where does this leave us? To a paradox. Toughness begins with accepting vulnerability. Skip the empty slogans and instead shout in the mirror every morning that you are strong. Ask yourself how you are feeling today. What makes you uneasy? And how would I react? When you notice you're worried, name it. When you feel a pang in your heart, don't push it away. Breathe with it, listen to it for the feeling. The annoying thing is the internal navigation system. When we cover our ears, we just run into the wall. Now let's talk about another aspect. Confidence. Society often confuses confidence with arrogance. People who talk loudly, walk strongly, and beat their chests to announce their names are often seen as natural leaders. But psychological science shows that true confidence is very quiet. A confident person does not need to assert that he is good. They don't compare, don't try to prove because they know and that's enough. Meanwhile, insecurity often lurks behind bragging. People who are unsure if they are okay constantly seek validation through words, actions, likes and views. I was stuck in that cycle as a young coach. I want people to know I am capable. I pretended to know, acted strict, and gave harsh exercises to demonstrate my mettle. But the more I did so, the more I distanced myself from my students and myself. Until I learned to speak, I didn't know. Let's find out. Then magic happens, connection happens, respect happens, and that leads to a form of power that is more lasting than any command or punishment. Remember, confidence is not about certainty, it's about openness. Finally, let's talk about a survival skill. Know when to keep going and when to stop. Society rewards perseverance. We glorify stories like he got rejected 99 times but kept going on the 100th time to succeed. Correct. Sometimes it's very inspiring. But sometimes persistence is a way to avoid reality, a way to cling to illusions. A truly strong person is not one who keeps moving forward, but one who knows when to stop, step back, or turn. Even though it may seem like a failure. A former student of mine, a professional runner, was faced with a difficult choice: continue running despite months of knee pain or take a year off to fully recover. She chose to quit even though it cost her a place in the national team, but the following year she came back stronger than ever because she didn't break down. She knew how to step back to live on. I remember sitting in a conference room with professional sports coaches. The topic that day was how to know if an athlete is really trying his best or just pretending to be tired to avoid trouble. A muscular man slammed his hand on the table. I don't care. If it says you can't do it, then it's time to make it do it, otherwise it will learn to make excuses. Many people nodded, but I remained silent. Not because I agree but because I realize something. We don't trust others as much as we don't trust ourselves. We doubt tiredness, we doubt negative emotions, we doubt intuition. And so we put up fences, we have to check, we have to measure, we have to monitor. But in that effort, we forget that resilience comes not from force but from self-control. In behavioral psychology research, it has been found that people who are good at self-regulating their emotions are not the ones who are good at suppressing them, but the ones who recover quickly and sustainably. They do not ignore pain but observe it. They don't fight stress but learn to navigate it. And above all, they believe that emotions are data, not threats. When you feel like you're in chaos, try doing one thing. Naming the feeling. It's no longer that I'm too tired but that I'm feeling overloaded from being asked for too much. It's not that I feel weak anymore, it's that I'm afraid of being judged. By naming your emotions, you pull them out of the clutter in your mind and put them on the table for observation. Only then can you make decisions instead of reacting blindly like when driving in fog. If you can't see anything you panic. But if you turn on your headlights and see the road you can still go. Slow but sure emotions are the headlights of the mind. I used to work with a women's college soccer team. They are talented girls full of ambition but are so afraid of failure that they sabotage their own games. Every time the match enters the decisive moment, they start making small mistakes, wrong transfers, and clumsy handling. Partly because of anxiety, partly because of fear of being scolded. I talked to the coach and suggested something strange. Allow players to make mistakes, as long as they dare to try new things. A few weeks later, the team was more creative, more aggressive and won again. What changed was not the technique but the belief that mistakes do not mean personal failure. So what creates power from within? What I believe is the foundation of true resilience is the ability to see pain, fear, and anxiety as a natural part of the journey, not denying it, not avoiding it, and not letting it take control. Another way to think about this is that emotions are the signals but behavior is the choice. You may feel like giving up but you don't have to. You can feel hurt but you are not obligated to attack the other person back. There is always a gap between emotion and behavior, and resilience is the ability to hold that gap long enough to choose the better. Think of Cool Rain Ali. Not only a legendary fighter but also a man of extraordinary spiritual fortitude. Ali was forced to retire from boxing for refusing to serve in the Vietnam War. That cost him the title, lost his peak performance, but he did not fall. He knew that losing a battle is not the end of the world and that a man's worth is not measured by instant victory but by how he maintains his dignity in the face of challenges. The lesson from Ali is not in the punch, but in the calm in the storm. At this point you may ask how to build real resilience. There is no simple formula. But there are 3 principles I've learned from decades of working with athletes, military personnel, leaders, and everyday people struggling with life. Face reality. Instead of embellishing or exaggerating the problem, look it straight in the eye. 2. Acknowledge your feelings. Treat emotions as information, not as obstacles. 3. Choose a conscious response. There is always a gap between stimulus and response. Use it and especially remember that self-care is not weakness, denial is not failure, letting go is not surrender. These are the signs of someone who knows where he is, where he wants to go, and is wise enough not to be pushed around by society's stereotypes. Over the years, I have observed a very special type of person. They are not outstanding, not talkative, not strong. But when the storm came, they stood firm. They are not the type to speak at press conferences, post motivational posts online, or share fake positive quotes, but they have something rare, a quiet inner strength. And what I realized is that inner strength is never noisy. It doesn't need to scream, it doesn't need to prove. It is present, calm, steady, deep as an underground stream. Over the years working with people at the top, athletes, CEOs, soldiers, artists, I have come to realize that the strongest people are those who understand their limits. They don't try to be supermen. They know when to take a step back. They are not ashamed to admit, I'm not feeling well today. And that is what makes them invincible, not because they are always strong, but because they know how to recover and rebuild their strength after each fall. During a conversation with a military psychologist, I asked him, "What do you see as the hallmark of a true spiritual warrior?" He answered without hesitation. "They are people who know how to ask for help." An answer that seems contrary to the image of a warrior. But that very paradox tells us a profound truth. Strength is not in not needing anyone but in daring to open up at the right time. A child was learning to ride a bike, he fell, he cried. You can say stop crying and make it stand up. Or can you come over and say it hurts? It's okay, everyone falls when they first start. Let's try again. Which child will learn more? Which child will grow up believing that falling is a natural part of life and not an evidence of failure? The problem is not about being tough or soft, but about how we teach each other to face difficulties. I used to work with a group of firefighters. People who are constantly exposed to danger. They said that the scariest thing was not the fire but the moment standing in front of the burning house, knowing clearly that there were people inside and having to decide whether to go in or not because not everyone went in and not everyone who went in always survived. So where does the toughness lie? It lies in taking responsibility, in foreseeing consequences, in keeping a cool head amid the chaos of instinct. During my training sessions, I often ask a simple question. If you knew for sure that you were going to fail, would you still do it? Because sometimes the hardest thing is not to do the extraordinary, but to dare to do the right thing. Even when no one sees, no one praises, no glory at all. And that is the ultimate depth of true self-toughness. You can pretend with others. You can put on all kinds of masks to please society. You can say I'm fine while inside I'm broken. But at some point, pretending becomes a burden. Have the courage to remove it. Let's get back to reality. No color, no paint. Listen to yourself. Even if it is a small voice of fatigue, anxiety, fear. React consciously. Don't rush, don't defend, and finally choose to move on. Not because you have to be strong, but because you know the meaning lies in continuing. It is a toughness that does not need to be forced, does not need to be shouted, does not need a cover. Just be authentic, sane, and resilient in your own way. And if anyone asks me, what is the difficult thing? I will answer. The difficult thing is to refuse to pretend. Is to accept yourself, to face life naked, raw, without a script and still move on. Pillar 2, listening to your body has a deep-rooted belief in modern society. Emotions are soft, they interfere with reason, they should be eliminated from important decisions in sports, in the workplace, in the military. We are taught that to be successful, we must control our emotions. Suppress emotions, overcome emotions. But has anyone ever wondered if emotions are not enemies but guides? You are jogging in the forest, it is raining, the wind is strong, the road is slippery, suddenly you feel your heart beating fast, your stomach is tight, your back is cold, you panic, you think you are too weak and try to push that feeling aside. But at that moment, you don't realize that your body is sending warning signals. There may be wild animals nearby. Maybe you're running out of steam or maybe you're about to slip. Emotions in their most primitive nature are the body's early alarm system. Fear, anxiety, stress. They are not born to punish you, they are born to save you. When I began to dig deeper into the neuroscience and physiology of emotion, I discovered something that completely changed the way I look at endurance. Every human decision is influenced by emotions to some extent. We think first and then we feel. But in reality, the limbic system reacts before you even realize it. It scans the environment, identifies threats, activates the brain and only then does the rational mind kick in, which sounds counterintuitive. That's great. Because if you know how to listen to your emotions properly, you will understand your body more deeply than any medical test. Let me give you an example. A long-distance runner I used to coach always had trouble at the end of the race. She has stamina. She had speed and technique, but every time she reached the final lap, her body reacted strangely, her hands were cold, her skin was covered in goosebumps, her breathing was ragged, her vision was blurry. At first we thought it was malnutrition and suspected a heart problem, but all tests were normal. Until I asked, "What were you thinking?" She was silent for a moment and then said, "I'm afraid I'll lose. Afraid of people saying I'm not good enough, afraid of being compared. And I understand it's not a physical problem, it's an internal rebellion." When the fear of rejection becomes too great, your body automatically pulls the brakes. It doesn't want you to continue. Since continuing means risking harm, that reaction is not weakness, it is an attempt to protect. And to get over it, you don't need to run faster. You need to talk about your feelings. Try to imagine that instead of shouting into the mirror every morning, you are not afraid of anything. You start your day by asking yourself what emotion you are carrying today. Am I stressed and worried? Why? The simple act of recognizing emotions has been shown in research to have a calming effect on the nervous system. When you name an emotion, you activate the prefrontal cortex, logic processing center and reduced amygdala activity, emotional response center. In other words, naming your emotions helps you regain control. This is something Zen masters have known for thousands of years and neuroscience has now confirmed. However, there is one point to distinguish: emotions are messengers, not commands. You may feel angry, but that doesn't mean you have to destroy things. You may feel scared, but that doesn't mean you have to run away. You may feel offended, but that doesn't mean you have to react immediately. There is always a gap between emotions and actions, and true toughness is the ability to keep that gap open. Think of emotions as a status report. You can't fire the person who delivers bad news, but you're not obligated to do everything they say. You listen, you analyze, and then you choose the course of action that is consistent with your values. During several training sessions, I began to change my approach. Instead of asking students to control their emotions, I teach them to make friends with their emotions. Try saying thank you every time you feel afraid. Try smiling when you feel nervous. Try saying oh. This feeling is so familiar. Every time you feel like giving up, that small action will help you separate yourself from your instinctive reaction and create space to choose. One of the people I learned the most about working with emotions wasn't a neuroscientist or a top athlete. It was a 10-year-old boy named Ran, a student in a community running program for children I used to support. Ran is the type of child that adults easily label as lazy. He was always the slowest in class, often asked for leave and rarely completed his homework. The gym teacher said it was not competitive. Parents sighed, maybe he has no talent. But when I spoke to Jen privately, I discovered something else. I'm afraid of having a heart attack. I'm surprised. Who told you that? My grandfather died of a heart attack while running. Ren said. I don't want to be like him. Suddenly the boy's every action made sense. It's not laziness, it's a defense mechanism. I don't force myself to run more. I give you time to learn your body. I invited a doctor to explain about the heart. I break down my homework into small, fun chunks. Every time I finish, I don't say you're so good, but ask you what your body tells you. And then slowly but surely Ryan started running not to win but to understand himself better. That story made me realize that emotions are not just a part of performance but the root of all behavior. If you don't dig down to the emotional level, you'll never know the real reason someone acts the way they do. Now let's move on to a familiar enemy. The voice in your head, you know it. The voice that whispers to you every time you face a challenge that you can't do it. Everyone is laughing at me, if I fail, I will be worthless. I am so weak. Many people call it the inner critic. And unfortunately, we often let it drive our entire lives. But what if I said you don't need to silence that voice, you just need to befriend it? In one workshop, I asked participants to write down all the critical statements they frequently said to themselves. Then I asked them to imagine those sentences coming from the mouth of a close friend. If my friend said those things to me every day, I would stop being friends with him. One person spoke, the room laughed but then fell silent because they realized they were torturing themselves with words they would never forgive if they came from someone else. So how do you make friends with that voice? First step, identify it. You are not the voice in your head, you are the one listening to it. Step 2, respond with compassion. Instead of brushing it off or arguing, say thank you for worrying but I'm fine, the way you would pat a scared child on the shoulder. Step 3, voice redirection. Instead of saying you're not good enough, try saying you're not good enough. But I'm learning, instead of what if I fail. Try it, what if I don't try it? This is not false positivity. This is a change in internal storytelling. The language you use to talk to yourself shapes how you perceive the world and shapes how you act in that world. I remember a cyclist once told me that every time she climbed a hill she wanted to give up. She started changing her self-talk from "this is the part she hates the most" to "this is the part she builds strength in." Just a small change, but the psychological effect is huge. Our brains are always looking for meaning when you tell them a different story. A story about purpose, journey and choice, it is no longer a victim. It becomes a companion. Think of your story as a soundtrack. If the background music is lines like "I'm bad, I'm not good enough, I'm going to lose," no matter how good you are, your steps will become heavy. But if the song is "I can try, I'm improving, I've been through more than this," then every step has an extra beat. In other words, emotions not only influence performance, they create the space for performance to arise in sport. The brain is often likened to a head coach, but perhaps a more accurate analogy is that of a storyteller. Because the brain not only controls the body, it interprets the world, it does not stop at perceiving things but also creates a story behind that perception. And the interesting thing is, if you change the story, you change the feeling. There is a famous study at Stanford University where two groups of students were shown a stressful movie. For one group, they were told that this was a test of psychological endurance. With the rest of the group, they were told that this was a mental strength training session along with a video. But the two groups had completely different physiological responses. The second group secreted less, had a more stable heart rate, and recovered faster. Just because they were told a different story. Apply this to yourself. When you feel your heart racing before a presentation, you can tell the story of you being on the verge of panic or your body preparing for an important challenge with the same phenomenon. But how you interpret it will determine the experience that follows. This is not a mind trick. This is understanding how emotions work and actively directing them. Emotions do not arise from a vacuum. They are the result of an interplay between memory, belief, and current context. If you were laughed at for speaking in front of your class in elementary school, 20 years later, every time you pick up a microphone, your body can still trigger a dangerous reaction. Even if you in a hall full of supporters, like a phantom pain from a healed scar, the emotion can return as a reflex. You can't delete it, but you can remove the old meaning and assign a new one. I call this process emotional decoding instead of asking why I feel this way. Ask what in the past is causing this feeling to come back. What old story is being told in my head? How can I rewrite this story so that it serves me rather than hinders me? Remember, you can't control the emotions that arise, but you can absolutely choose the role you give those emotions in your life. Over the years of my work, I have come to realize a great paradox. The most resilient people are often the most sensitive because they listen to their bodies. They don't let their emotions get the best of them, but they don't ignore them either. They walk like a rider on a wild horse, without coercion, without indulgence, but accompanied. Try looking at yourself. Have you ever tried to hold back tears just to maintain a strong image? Have you ever felt angry because you couldn't say how hurt you were? Have you ever given up? But justify that it is just not worth the effort. We have beaten too many things. Sensitivity is labeled as weakness. Silence is seen as a lack of courage. Anxiety was seen as a disease to be cured and fatigue was blamed on lack of willpower. But if you stop and ask your body what it is trying to tell you, you will discover deep messages that need to be listened to rather than suppressed. I used to work with a professional marathon racer who was always in the top 5 in every race but never finished first. There was always a voice in her head telling her she didn't deserve to win. It does not come from physicality but from a belief formed in childhood. She grew up in a family that always put her brother first. When she changed that belief, when she rewrote her story, she was just a facilitator. As she believed she had the right to win, her body began to break its limits. It is the synchronization of mind and body that opens the door to potential. In my training program, there is one principle that I always repeat. Listening to your body is not weakness, it is wisdom. Because if you don't listen to your body when it whispers, it will make you listen when it screams. It was a lesson I learned the hard way. In my early years as an athlete, I used to ignore every sign of exhaustion just to run a few extra seconds faster. I used to see pain as proof that I was making progress and the voice in my head as an obstacle to overcome. Until one day, I had a laryngospasm in the middle of a race. I collapsed, lost control, panicked. It was the first time I felt like I was dying. And as I recovered, I no longer saw my body as a machine. I started looking at it as a partner, just like in any relationship. If you ignore your partner and only ask them to do what you want, sooner or later a breakup will happen. But if you listen, communicate and adjust, the relationship will become stronger. Your body is talking to you all the time through your pulse, breathing, muscle tension, pain locations, feelings of heaviness, lightness, heat, cold, shivering, burning, hunger, thirst, sleepiness. They are not obstacles. They are the language of survival, and you cannot develop endurance, resilience or bravery if you don't learn to read and understand that language. Try doing one thing at the end of each day. Sit down, close your eyes and ask your body 3 questions. 1. When did I hear you today? 2. How did I ignore you today? Dad, what makes you grateful and what makes you tired? That small action of just a few minutes will change the relationship between you and yourself. And then one day, when faced with a big challenge, a test, a match, a breakup, a surgery, a professional failure, you will no longer be the one struggling to find a way to escape or forcing yourself to endure. You will be the one who stands still, feels everything that passes by, and then chooses to act not from panic but from clarity. That is the test model I believe in. Not the hard, armored kind, but the soft, steadfast kind, like a shelter that bows in the storm but never breaks. Forget the image of the hero gritting his teeth and struggling. Learn from the soldier who said, "I'm scared but I'm going anyway." Take a cue from athletes who stop for a minute to breathe deeply instead of running blindly. Learn from a child who knows how to embrace the pain and say it hurts too much, because that is the beginning of healing. And remember, no matter who you are, what age you are, where you are in your journey, you can always relearn to listen to your body, you can always start over. You can always choose to tell a different story. I don't promise it will be easy. I just promise this. If you listen, really listen, your body will never betray you. It doesn't want you to be Superman. It just wants you to be the truest, deepest, most lasting version of yourself. And in a world that constantly disconnects us from our emotions, from our natural rhythms, from ourselves, stopping to put your hand on your heart and whisper, "I hear you," is the most revolutionary act you can do. Pillar 3, conscious response instead of impulsive reflex. One autumn morning, I stood by the track, watching a former student as he prepared to enter the final round of the national championship. From afar I saw him being closely followed by 2 opponents, all 3 of them exhausted, sweat pouring down like rain, eyes tense, but then at the penultimate turn, I saw him lift his head slightly, take a deep breath, and instead of hastily accelerating like the other 2, he kept a steady pace. And it was at the very end, when others had burned out too soon, that he rose up like a silent wolf, choosing the right moment to strike. That's the difference between an instinctive reaction and a conscious response. We live in a world where everything happens so fast. Incoming messages must be replied immediately, rising emotions must be released immediately. Offended must respond immediately. Being criticized must defend immediately. And so we get caught up in the cycle: stimulus, reaction, consequence. But real power lies not in the response, but in the space between stimulus and response. A gap so small that you can ignore it or use it to change the entire trajectory of action. And there you don't just act, you choose. You are being scolded in the middle of a meeting, the instinctive reaction is to get angry, fight back, or stay silent and swallow your anger. But if you stop for half a second, take a breath, and ask yourself which response will serve your long-term values, then you are shaping yourself. This is not self-restraint, gritting one's teeth and bearing it. This is self-mastery from within, and it starts with keeping the mind steady enough amidst the turmoil. I used to work with a world-class weightlifter. He told me, "I can lift hundreds of pounds, but the hardest thing is to keep my mind steady when I step into the ring. Just one thought that I'm going to miss, or 1 second of distraction from noise, and the whole technique collapses, keeping my mind steady." It's not about not being attacked by emotions, it's about observing the emotions coming in and letting them flow like a wave. As Zen masters used to say, you can't stop the wind from blowing, but you can learn to set your sails in the right direction to do that. You need a skill I call metaris, or second-level consciousness, the ability to be alive and to observe yourself being alive. It sounds metaphysical, but it starts with something very concrete. When you feel your heart pounding, don't just feel it, but notice that you feeling it when you're angry instead of yelling. Notice the anger rising. When you're about to say something sharp, see yourself preparing to hurt someone. That's the moment you step out of the role of the villain and step into the role of director. Neuroscience research shows that when you develop the ability to observe yourself, you increase activity in the prefrontal cortex, the center of behavioral control. At the same time, you decrease activity in the amygdala, the center for emotional response. This not only helps you think more clearly, but also reduces the risk of getting caught up in anxiety, depression, or impulsive reactions. In other words, observation creates distance, and distance creates freedom. Think of a good chess player. They don't just see the current piece, but also see the next few moves. Each move is considered. If I do this, what will happen? If I choose that move, how will I position myself? Keeping that level of mind is not easy. Especially when you're in the middle of a storm, when morale is rising, when others are provoking, when your ego is threatened. But if you practice it every day in small situations, when the event comes, you will no longer be a reactor but a chooser. Action. One afternoon in Colorado, I attended a professional climbing team practice. The weather was unpredictable, the wind was strong, the air was cold, the pressure changed. As a young female athlete was trying to conquer a vertical rock section, she suddenly slipped, her whole body was swinging in the air, her crab legs wobbled, but instead of panicking, she took a deep breath, adjusted her safety rope, and slowly swung herself back to her grip. No screams, no hasty movements. After landing, I asked, "Aren't you scared?" She laughed, "Yes. But I learned to let fear not control my actions." It was a great lesson, the reflex is natural. But feedback is an option. In psychology, the phenomenon of impulsiveness and unconscious reactions is called amygdala hitch. When the emotional center of the brain takes over the entire nervous system, you no longer analyze, you just fight, flight, or freeze, and the consequences are often disastrous. So how do you take back the steering wheel from impulsiveness? The first step is to realize that you're being carried away. It sounds simple, but in anger or fear, we often forget ourselves. We no longer see ourselves screaming. We only see someone insulting us. We no longer see ourselves clenching our fists. We only see ourselves being threatened. Presence is replaced by instinctive reaction. That's why I teach my students a simple technique of naming the state. Whenever an emotion arises, instead of acting immediately, say in your head, "I'm angry." Or "This is anxiety," or "This is shame." This small action, according to research, helps calm the emotional response area and increase the ability to regulate behavior. It's like you turn on the light in the dark room, just one action but it changes the whole space. The second step is to adjust the intensity of the emotion rather than trying to turn it off. I call it turning the volume knob of the emotion. You can't turn off the noise in your head, but you can make it quiet enough to hear the voice of reason. It's like when you're listening to loud music and need to concentrate, you don't have to turn the music off, you just have to turn the volume down. So how do you turn the emotional knob? In my coaching program, I use the method of rounding, which roughly translates to returning to the ground. There are many ways to take 3 deep breaths and count backwards from 5 to 1. Touch an object very slowly, feel the temperature. Structure yourself by naming 5 things you see, 4 sounds you hear, 3 smells you smell, 2 things you touch and 1 thing you're grateful for. It sounds weird. But those actions pull you out of the mind whirlpool and bring you back to the present. And it's from that place, where the mind is quiet, that you can give a conscious response. One of my students, an emergency room worker, told me that whenever he encountered a serious trauma case, the first thing he did was put his hand on his chest and silently say, "Calm down." This was not to quell the panic, but to remind himself that panic is not the commander. Just as when you are driving a car on a slippery road, your instinct is to slam on the brakes, but the correct action is to gently release your foot from the steering wheel and let the wheels correct themselves. In life, too, sometimes the strongest thing you can do is not to react immediately. Let me tell you about an Aikido warrior I once met. He was almost 70 years old, small in stature, and his voice was as soft as a breath. I asked, "What is your secret to not fighting back when you are attacked?" He laughed, "I don't fight back. I invite the other person to move with me. That is not surrender. It is the ability to keep the mind flexible enough to turn reaction into art." During one training session with a group of young athletes, I asked them to do a strange exercise. When you feel bad, don't try to overcome it. Describe that feeling in pictures. At first they burst out laughing. "What did you say?" I nodded. For example, if the emotion of anxiety were an animal, what would it be? If fatigue had a color, what color would it be? A few minutes later, a boy said, "Worry is a spider that crawls up my neck and makes me stiff." Another girl said, "The pressure is like a heavy stone pressing down on the chest." And then a friend whispered, "Anger is thunder. Come fast, destroy fast and disappear." We didn't run that day. But I know that day they learned the most important thing, knowing how to name it, which is half the way to control. We are often manipulated by emotions because we think we are being taken over by them. But when you detach the emotion from yourself, seeing it as an external entity, you take back control. It is what elite athletes, stage performers, and even surgeons practice, not to be emotionless, but to be emotionally grounded. And one of the most effective tools to do that is to redirect attention. You're getting ready for a competition and panic sets in. If you focus on thinking, "What if I fail?" you are watering the panic plant. But if you shift your attention to your breathing, to the sound of your feet hitting the ground, or to the rhythm of the music in your head, you are shifting control from your emotional brain to your executive brain. Research shows that the brain cannot concentrate deeply on two opposing streams of thought at the same time. So if you create for yourself a focused anchor, you can keep your mind steady in the midst of a rough sea. I remember a story of a rescuer. When asked how he stayed calm when having to pull a victim out of a burning house, he replied, "I only did 3 steps. 1. Check the temperature of the door. 2. Open the door to the ground. 3. Count to 5 and act." There is no room for chaos because structure helps stabilize the reaction. In coaching, I call it an internal playbook, a series of actions or prompts that you prepare in advance to use in a pressure situation. For example, when panicking, take a deep breath, count 5 actions. When afraid of failure, focus on the effort, not the result. When offended, take a step back, repeat the question, clarify the intention. Someone said, "It sounds like a robot." I smiled. Yes, because robots are not easily drawn into emotions. And if you program yourself to stay calm, you can respond more freely. You don't need a script for every situation, but you do need to recognize the moments when you're likely to slip and have your handrails in place. A soldier in battle, he knows that he will not be able to keep his mind clear if he waits until the bomb explodes to think of a way to hide. So before entering the battle, he practiced dozens of times how to lie down, how to curl up, how to react. That does not make him insensitive. It helps you respond strategically when emotions run high in your life. We each have our own battlefield, and unfortunately most of us enter it unprepared. We think, "I will know how to handle it when the time comes." But the truth is, when you don't have a plan, you act on instinct and gut feeling. When left untrained, it often does not serve long-term interests. For a time, I coached a group of young athletes who had experienced trauma, both psychological and physical. They are people who no longer believe in control. Whenever they are under pressure, they either shrink away or run away or get angry with them. The world is an unpredictable place and reacting is the only way they know how to survive. I'm not saying they should be more resilient. I don't force them to face their fears. I start by teaching them how to rest. Sounds like the opposite of Tez. Actually, that was the missing piece. Because if you are always tense like a guitar string, when you need to play a difficult piece of music, the string will be weak. But if you learn to relax at the right time, when the challenge comes you can unleash it fully. We often think of toughness as always being tense, always enduring, always straining. But the strongest people I've ever met are the ones who know how to let go. They know when to lower their voice, when to laugh, when to sleep. Need to ask, do I really need to win this? And that's the last but not least point of responding instead of reacting. Knowing when to not react at all. Let me tell a personal story for once. After a talk, someone came up to me and said bluntly, "I find what you're saying boring and unoriginal." Part of me wants to argue, to prove it, to ask, have you ever stood in front of hundreds of people? But I stopped, I just looked at that person and said, "Thanks for sharing." He was surprised, and I felt free because I was no longer caught in the dance of reaction. I choose to save my energy for something more worthy. And that's when I realized when you're not forced to react, you become invulnerable like a still lake. Others can throw stones at you, but if you don't make any ripples, the stone will make nothing but a little quiet sound. Reaction is a reflex, anyone can do it. Feedback is an art, it takes practice. It requires knowing who you are, where you are, what's important to you, and what's just background noise. It requires you to sit with the emotion long enough to discern. This is the truth and this is just a temporary feeling. It requires you to not be a victim of circumstances but to be the author of how you respond to them. And most importantly, it doesn't require you to be as hard as a stone statue, but to be as flexible, delicate, and powerful as water. Remember, water does not resist, water flows, water is flexible, water chooses its path. And because water wears away stone, we don't need more good responders. We need intentional responders. People who don't let anger dictate their words, people who don't let fear dictate their steps. People do not let hurt lead to revenge. People who know how to stop, take a deep breath, look at the big picture, and then act on values, not on impulse. That's the real tone the world needs. Silent, deep and rich in wisdom. Pillar 4 transcends discomfort. We've talked a lot about listening to our bodies, observing our emotions, and responding instead of reacting. But there will be times when no matter how well you do everything, discomfort still comes, pain still exists, and insecurity still haunts. And that is when you face the deepest question in your journey of developing courage. How to not only endure discomfort but also rise above it. When I was a young athlete, I thought being able to endure pain was an inborn talent. Some people are born to be resilient, but I am not. So every time I feel muscle fatigue, chest pain, or depression, I assume that I am weak, that I am not like them, and so I often give up early. But then I started observing resilient people from marathon runners to special forces soldiers to single mothers of 3. And I realized no one likes being uncomfortable. They just have to live with it. That's the biggest difference. They don't try to eliminate discomfort, they build the capacity to live with it. There's a Kenyan ultra-endurance legend who once told me, "People think I don't hurt, but I hurt from mile 5. I just learned not to fight the pain." That is the concept I want to emphasize here. Overcome rather than fight discomfort is real. But instead of pushing it away, you learn to go through it. Start from the roots, the physical and mental foundation. If you want to do something difficult, you can't just try harder. You have to build the foundation like a building that wants to be tall must have a deep foundation. If you don't get enough sleep, eat poorly, are in a toxic environment, and are constantly mentally drained, you can't expect to be able to weather a crisis. But unfortunately in modern culture we are encouraged to do more, do whatever it takes, sleep 4 hours, good, skip meals, great, push through the pain, great. What is the result? A society exhausted both physically and emotionally. During my research, I discovered a paradox. The most resilient people are the ones who take the best care of themselves not because they are weak but because they understand that if they want to go the long way they must build a vessel strong enough to hold the pressure. An athlete I used to coach would always blame himself when he was tired. She said, "I don't want to be lazy." But after several exhausting sessions, I told her, rest is not a reward for effort. Rest is part of the effort. And then when she started sleeping enough, eating enough, relaxing at the right times, her performance didn't decrease, it increased. You can't overcome discomfort if you don't have enough energy to survive it. And you can't thrive under pressure if you don't have a strong base inside. Think about it. If you're stuck in a storm, the first thing is not to fight the wind, but to find a safe place. Then figure out how to move forward. Similarly, if you're struggling with a challenge, before you try to endure any more, check in with yourself. Have you slept enough? Do you have someone to talk to? What false beliefs are you holding? Do I really need to win today? You'll be surprised how just answering those questions will calm the discomfort. Another time, I was invited to coach a startup group that was preparing to raise its first round of funding. They were all young, smart, passionate, and exhausted. 3 of the 5 founders were sleeping less than 4 hours a night. They drank coffee, changed their water, ate junk food, and were constantly restless. I asked, "Why don't you take a day off?" The leader replied immediately, "If you rest, you lose, someone else will surpass you." I don't blame them because that's the voice that society has planted in our heads. If you don't hurt, it's not worth it. If you don't exhaust yourself, you're not really trying. But then I asked, so if one of you collapses, who will take the rest? Silence followed by a sigh. We don't think about that. That's a blind spot for so many people in sports, in business, in personal life. We focus on overcoming difficulties and forget that discomfort is the environment, not the enemy. When you start to see discomfort not as something to be eliminated but as part of the process, everything changes. You no longer say I have to be tired to do it. It's not that I can do it even though I'm tired. You don't wait until you feel confident to speak. You speak even though you're shaking. You don't wait until you're no longer nervous to begin. You begin while you're nervous, and that's the difference between getting through and overcoming. I once talked to a cancer surgeon. He said, "People think I don't get nervous when I'm operating, but the truth is I always get nervous. I just learn to let it go." "No, Commander, I ask you how." He laughed, "I don't fight it. I let it go by my side, as a silent companion." That answer haunted me for years because it was the complete opposite of the model of forcing yourself to overcome every emotion. It taught me that there is a kind of strength that comes from accepting that you are not completely strong. And from that, I noticed that the people who are able to do the hardest things are not the ones who are stubborn in the face of difficulty, but the ones who are very sensitive to what is going on inside. They have a kind of deep attention, like an athlete who feels every heartbeat when he is about to exceed his limit, or an artist who knows when his emotions are overwhelming his technique. So how do you train yourself to overcome instead of just endure? The answer lies in intention. If you only endure to wait for the end, you will always be in a state of attrition. But if you understand that the discomfort that is training you is revealing something, opening up a certain possibility, then you are no longer a victim, you become a learner. Try applying this in your next practice session. When you're gasping for breath, when your muscles are screaming, instead of thinking I can't take it anymore, try asking yourself, what is this teaching me? How am I responding to fatigue? Can I relax into this tension? When you shift your attention from suffering to learning, the experience transforms. And this is true for emotional pain. When you're hurting from loss, rejection, betrayal, instead of trying not to feel anything, try putting your hand on your heart and saying thank you. Because this pain shows that you once loved, once trusted, once hoped. That's not surrender, that's transformation. I worked with a rock climber who almost died after a 14,000-foot fall. She couldn't go back to training. Every time she approached a cliff, her heart rate would spike, her palms would sweat, and the memories would come back like a vivid nightmare. Everyone told her, get over the fear. But I didn't. I said you don't have to overcome the fear, you just have to sit with it, listen to it, let it finish telling its story. And for months she didn't climb, she just sat there looking at the mountain, at the rope, at the climbing shoes. She breathed with the fear, until one day it stopped screaming in her ear. It just whispered carefully and she climbed again. That was one of the most important lessons I've ever learned about discomfort. Sometimes overcoming isn't about overcoming, it's about moving into a state of coexistence. You're running, your body starts to get tired, your mind starts to whine. Stop. If you think I'm not allowed to get tired, you'll fight with yourself. But if you think hello tired, I see you but I'm still going. You've switched roles. You're no longer the one being overwhelmed. You're the one choosing to keep going. The difference isn't the intensity of the pain, it's your relationship to that pain. In many ancient cultures, especially the ascetic traditions. From Japanese Zen masters to Chinese Zen warriors, people do not eliminate suffering, they enter it actively, guided, purposefully, discomfort. If approached properly, it can become a gateway to awakening, and on a scientific level. This is also confirmed. Studies on HOMS, the phenomenon when the body becomes stronger after exposure to a small amount of stressor, show that discomfort, when dosed properly, has the ability to activate recovery and strengthening mechanisms like a vaccine. A small amount of virus can activate the immune system. Similarly, a small amount of difficulty, if approached properly, can build endurance, patience, and even spiritual depth. But the important thing is the dose and the meaning. If you see discomfort as meaningless, it will drain you. But if you attach it to a goal, a value, a belief, you can go very far. Think of parents. They stay up all night, changing diapers, holding a baby, losing personal freedom for years. But no one calls it suffering, they call it love. Or an artist who practices thousands of hours for a piece of music that only lasts 3 minutes. No one thinks they suffer because every note, even though it is difficult, contains a higher meaning. So if you are in a challenge, try asking yourself, why am I doing this? What does this mean to me? If I overcome it, what version of myself will I become? Meaning is not something that is ready-made. It is something created when you dare to look at the difficulty and ask what you can learn from it. I once talked to a former drug addict who used to live in homelessness. He sat in front of me that day. As a fitness trainer for teenagers. I asked, how did you get out? He did not hesitate. I did not get out. I looked straight at it. Pain, if embraced properly, can become a guide. Fear, if listened to listening, can become a mentor, and insecurity, if understood, can become a source of energy. I have seen it in the eyes of people who have fallen, who have been judged as weak, who have lived in the dark but still move on. Not because they are no longer in pain, but because they have allowed the pain to live with them. There is a kind of strength that does not come from muscles, steel wills, or victory cheers. It comes from stillness. From the moment you slow down your breathing, put your hand on your chest and say, I am still here. That is the image I carried with me throughout my journey of writing this book. Not an invincible warrior, but a person who is trembling but still chooses to stand up, chooses to move forward, chooses to live authentically. Look back at the whole journey in Pillar 1. You learn to remove the mask, face the truth and admit that you are also vulnerable. But that is the starting point of true bravery. In Pillar 2, you learn to listen to your body instead of seeing it as a tool to be used. Control. You learn to live with your emotions, not suppress them, not fear them, but befriend them as a companion in Pillar 3. You learn to respond instead of react. You are no longer the one who is pulled into a reflexive spiral, but the one who stands in the middle of the storm, still choosing to act according to your values. And now in Pillar B, you learn to transcend discomfort not by suppressing it, but by building meaning within the pain. You learn that hardship is not a barrier, but a place where you are tempered, revealed, reborn in a deeper form. If there is one last thing I want you to take away after closing these pages, it is that you do not need to be a superhero to do difficult things. You just need to be human, dare to be honest, dare to observe, dare to choose, and dare to walk even when your heart is trembling. Toughness does not lie in not being afraid, not in pain, not in weakness. Toughness lies in being able to live in the midst of fear, in the midst of pain, and in the midst of weakness. Remember when you are gasping for breath during the last exercise, when you feel numb after a failure, when you hesitate before a big decision, when you want to scream or run away, stop, listen, breathe and ask, what is the meaning of this pain? If you dare to ask, you will find, and if you find, you will no longer fear difficulty. Because when difficulty becomes your friend, you will no longer be alone in the journey of doing difficult things. Thank you for staying until the last seconds of this journey. Do Hardings is not a book about how to become extraordinary. It does not paint a model of an Iron Man who knows how to brush all pain aside. On the contrary, it brings you closer to the most human part of yourself. Where you can tremble and still keep going, can be disappointed but not retreat, can stumble and still keep going. If you have listened to this far, I trust that you are not looking for quick advice, quick recipes for spiritual enrichment or quotes to hang up wall. What you need and deserve is an honest conversation with yourself. I hope this book has contributed a small part to that conversation. I would love for you to leave a review, not to give this book a score but to share how you think, feel, and even doubt what you have just heard. Such feedback not only helps me but may also reach someone else who is lost in their own inner struggle. And if you have a book that made you stop, sigh, or even cry, please do not keep it to yourself. Please suggest that we have the opportunity to accompany each other again on another journey with a different text but still a deep dive into the human being. See you in the next book.